Hey everybody, what's up and welcome back to the garden, I guess. This is going to be a quick how-to video. Probably not so quick because I want to have as much detail as possible. So, growing zinnias. It's pretty easy. It's one of the easiest flowers, I think, that you can grow depending upon where you live. They love hot weather. Not, tropical, too hot, but definitely do better in places that have a really warm summer. I'm lucky because they seem to do really well where I live. And starting them is pretty easy. The first key point is you want to wait till, all the frost is over with, till after your last frost date before you start to grow them. And there are several ways to start zinnia seeds. Like any other seed, you can start them indoors in a seed tray under grow lights. I personally don't use grow lights, so I'm probably not the best person to tell you about that. But, I mean, you can try starting them in a south-facing windowsill in, a seed tray if that's what you want to do. You can also use paper towels. You can dampen paper towels to pre-sprout the seeds before you plant them into your garden if you're worried about, the birds getting to them or something else eating them before they have a chance to germinate. I think Diane Mum has a great video on how to pre-sprout the zinnia seeds if you want to check that out. I'll put a link down in the description. Of course, you can direct sow your zinnia seeds directly in the garden if you're not worried about the garden birds and everything eating your seeds. You can direct sow them right into the garden. Me personally, in the past, I just surface sow them onto a well-prepared bed and they germinate fine. If you're a little more meticulous, you can just lightly cover them with soil and give them a good water. You'll have, I think, a really good success rate there as long as the weather has, kind of warmed up and become warm enough. That really is a key with zinnias. You don't want to plant them too early because they're not going to be able to tolerate the frost, and they're definitely not going to germinate very well if your soil is too cold. The last option, and an option that I use actually a whole lot, is that you can winter sow your zinnia seeds. The winter sowing method is super easy. I have other videos on that. I'll put those down in the description too, how to do it. Basically, you take a milk jug container and you sow the seeds into it and close it up. You can do this before the last frost date has come, and the milk jug really serves as kind of a mini greenhouse for your seedlings, and it's an excellent way to get a head start on your season, especially if maybe you live in a climate that's a little bit cooler. Even if you do live in a climate that's a little bit cooler, it's not a big deal with zinnias because once the summer warms up, these things grow and bloom so quickly that in most places you shouldn't have any trouble at all, I don't think. So once your seeds have germinated, if you started them outside the garden, it's important to transplant them. Make sure you're hardening them off before you're putting them straight outside. If you direct sow them, that's great too. You don't have to even worry about that. Same with winter sowing. Don't have to worry about the hardening off. No big deal. Next thing you want to do is really decide if you want to pinch or not pinch your zinnias. Basically, pinching the zinnia plants when they're small, I usually do it when they have about 3 or 4 sets of true leaves. Pinching the zinnias will encourage your plants to start branching earlier. When the plants start to branch earlier, you can expect them to have more blooms, but the blooms might come a little bit later. In my garden, I personally don't pinch them, but it's really up to you. I don't pinch them because they do grow so fast and bloom so fast. After the first flowers opened up, they'll start to branch on their own naturally, and of course I'll be cutting those flowers off. So it's not a big deal for me personally, but some people I know really like the advantage of pinching when they're young. In addition to pinching the plants, you want to make sure that you're definitely deadheading the flowers as much as possible. When I say deadheading, that just means that you're cutting off all the spent blooms of the flowers. That, of course, won't be a problem if you're growing your zinnias for cut flowers, because, of course, when you cut the flowers for arrangements, you're naturally kind of deadheading the plant on its own, so it's keeping the plant growing and growing and growing. If you're growing zinnias just, for landscape or for the garden or whatever, you want to make sure that you are cutting off those blooms before they have a chance to set seed. Ideally, we really want to make sure that those do not set seed so that they'll keep growing and producing flowers all the way through the season. Zinnias do kind of weaken over time. The flowers get smaller as, the plants continue to grow and everything. But really, they are great candidates for succession sowing. So, if you are growing cut flowers, you might want to succession sow zinnias every 2 weeks. Plant some zinnias, you know, wait 2 weeks, plant some more zinnias. That will keep the strong blooms just coming and coming and coming. I know it's not for everybody, but it's an option that's there if you want. In terms of spacing and everything, in my garden, I personally space the plants very close together, about 6 inches apart from each other. And most cut flower operations, I believe the general rule of thumb is to plant them about 9 inches apart from each other. This will give you, you know, better air circulation, prevent things like powdery mildew, which can be a big problem. And of course, it will impact the size of the flowers. In my garden, my flowers are a little bit smaller. And this year I did have problems with powdery mildew just because I had so many flowers crammed into one spot. So again, that's something that you might want to consider. If you're stressed for space, zinnias will do pretty well crowded together. I mean, like I said, there are some sacrifices that you might have to anticipate if you plan on doing that. In terms of fertilizing, I usually fertilize about once a year on my zinnias. I don't do very much. I personally use a seabird guano. It has a nice ratio and it encourages tons and tons of blooms. Occasionally I'll also feed some maybe fish emulsion or kelp, but it's not really imperative. They seem to grow in some of the more poor spots in my gardens, which is definitely another reason that I like them so much, because they are very much a no-fuss plant. There really are varieties for just about anybody, whatever needs that you have. There are dwarf varieties that get, you know, less than 12 inches tall, and of course there are cut flower varieties which oftentimes reach 6 foot in my garden. And if you are growing one of those tall cutting varieties, you might want to consider some horizontal trellis netting. I didn't do it this year and I'm regretting it because a storm came along and blew all of the zinnias across the ground, which is a bummer. So if you are going to grow a tall variety and you live somewhere with lots of wind or storms, you might think about a way that you'll have to trellis these if you want to keep them going all summer long. For the most part, zinnias don't really seem to have too many pest problems. One of the major pests that I get here, of course, are Japanese beetles, and they seem to always flock to the zinnias. And the zinnia bed is not very attractive during this time of year, if I'm going to be totally honest with y'all, because the Japanese beetles get in there and they eat all of the blooms. But luckily, that only lasts for a short period of time, and once that's over, I can kind of cut back the plants a little bit, get that eaten growth off of there. Lots of damage done on the leaves and things, and they start to replenish themselves in the fall. These things are so great to have, especially, you know, to add to an existing garden to attract pollinators. You know, the butterflies and bees absolutely seem to love these things, and I love them too. They really are a cheery addition. It's nice to watch the hummingbirds go through there. Overall, I think this is definitely a winner. Zinnias were one of the first flowers that I ever grew, and they'll definitely be a mainstay in my garden. I honestly can't imagine having a garden without having any zinnias in it. For as easy as they are to grow and as cheaply as you can find zinnia seeds, I think it's definitely worth it. And of course, it's always nice to have a fresh flower arrangement or bouquet, to cheer you up. So that's really about it. I hope that this video was helpful. If it was, I would absolutely love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me how you grow zinnias. And feel free to subscribe. I'd love to have you. We're working on growing the channel and new content up on the regular. I do gardening and soap making and all kinds of just random projects. Feel free to share this. I hope y'all are having a real great day, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye, guys.